Hey noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking. Today I want to check out History Hit again because I heard the word Pompeii. So here on History Hit today, I noticed that 4 days ago, this historian spoke about Pompeii. And you know, I have a little bit of a passion with Pompeii.
Why didn't Pompeii evacuate? Obviously there wasn't a siren like we have today in situations of disaster. The human brain essentially boils. There were people who would have been vaporized. I'm Daisy Dunn and I'm here with History Hit answering the most Googled questions on Pompeii.
Very nice. So yeah, some people did get vaporized. She's correct. A lot of people died because of the thermal shock due to the heat wave. I'm gonna have a great time with this one. Evacuating, that's the thing. I gotta say, like, I didn't want to be too pedantic already at the beginning, but I'm just gonna say the fact that there was no siren doesn't matter because we're talking about a volcanic eruption and a Plinian eruption at that, which would have been explosive. We're talking about, I'm not attacking her, I'm just being the usual pedantic me. You know, the Plinian explosion is very interesting because you have all of this accumulating pressure inside the volcano and then it explodes and the gases and smoke, Pliny the Elder died in there, and then Pliny the Younger writes these letters as he's looking at it from outside, and then he says that there was this cloud, and that's because a Plinian eruption does that. It will shoot smoke and stuff that is usually ejected from a volcano kilometers up in the air.
Why is Pompeii famous? Well, Pompeii is famous because of the way it came to an end. It was buried over by this disastrous eruption of Vesuvius in the 1st century AD, and we often
79 AD.
Speak of it as being a city that's been frozen in time. So we know it a lot better than we do most other cities in the ancient world. Was Pompeii part of the Roman Empire? Yes, it was. Pompeii had actually grouped together with a lot of other Italian cities and towns back in 91 BC to fight the Social War, which was a civil war against Rome. But since
Okay, interesting. She's going into the actual civic, and it's going to be interesting to listen to this. I'd like to underline, was Pompeii part of the Roman Empire? The way I would have answered, which once again, I'm sure she's much more prepared than me. She's wonderful up to this point. But what I'm saying is, maybe the way I would have started is that it was a Roman city in the sense that it became Roman, but it wasn't founded by the Romans, aka the Latins. It was founded by the Oscan people. Probably 8th century BC. I want to say. I'll have to double check that. There is a lot that we can say. Maybe I can tell you a little bit about the myth of the foundation of Pompeii. I'm going to let her finish to speak, so I won't be as obnoxious and condescending as I usually am. I'll let her speak, and then I'll tell you about the myth of the foundation if she doesn't say it. The origin and the name, for example, which comes from an ancient word which was pronounced Pompe. But let's see if she says that.
Since then, it had been incorporated into it and relations between the two were pretty good. Was Pompeii named after Pompey? So speaking here about Pompey the Great.
Pompey! What is it? I have always pronounced it Pompeii, both for the city and for the general, the consul. Apparently, a lot of people, both in America and in England, she sounds British, both they tend to differentiate. They say Pompeii for the city, but they say Pompey. Well, his name was Pompeius. It's just a Pompey. Who would be afraid of Pompey, the great Roman consul? Don't you mess with Pompey. It's just one of those things. I can't help it. If you really want to differentiate, just say Pompeius at that point. Yes, people will think you're obnoxious. That's my daily bread. It's a Tuesday for me. But I just can't say Pompey. Pompey. Let's see what she tells us about Pompey.
Great sort of general who was fighting sort of an ally and then an enemy of Julius Caesar. He existed a long time after Pompeii was named. So no, Pompeii was not named after Pompey.
Good.
We think its name probably derived rather from the idea of there being 5 different cities of Pompeii.
Very good.
In one of the ancient Italic languages refers to 5 different towns. So we think it's a sort of compilation of those places, so nothing to do with Pompey the Great. Next.
Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus. Now that is a general you don't want to mess with. Yeah, that was great. She is on the spot, hitting the mark, tip of the spear. I appreciate that. The word Pompe, which is the ancient word, probably meant five. It's similar to Greek penta, quinque in Latin. It just means five, and it's because it was a conglomerate of five pre-existing urban realities that fused together. Imagine you have the volcano, right? The place where Pompeii was built was extremely important economically, and it had been thriving for centuries before the complete total annihilation due to the catastrophic event in 79 AD. What's interesting is that the reason why it was so good is because you had basement nearby, these little slopes and valleys around Vesuvius, and then you have the river Sarno, which was a main artery of commerce and trade. It was a great place, and they inhabit this space, they fuse together. She's really, really good. There was a massive earthquake before the actual event proper, mentioned both by Seneca. There is another one, what's his name? There's another one, it will come to me. Let's see what subchapters we have. So we're going to watch this one, it's going to be great. Did Pompeii know Vesuvius was a volcano? Oh, this part, this is going to be the best. I have a lot to say, I have my theories. I want to see what she says, since she's really good. Were there warnings before the Pompeii eruption? Well, the eruption was quite sudden, in fact. I guess the earthquake. When did Pompeii erupt? This is another one. It's a very chunky section. Probably she's going to talk about the coins of Emperor Titus. That's going to be my guess here, because that helps us place it temporally. Of course, we know it's 79, but we don't know if it happened probably between October and November, definitely after September, but we'll see how she justifies that. How did Pompeii eruption happen? She's reading Pliny the Younger, absolutely great source. Was there lava in Pompeii? There's the whole pyroclastic flow, in fact, described by the ancients. Was there a tsunami in Pompeii? Tsunami, I don't think so, but I could be wrong. The Pompeii victims suffer. That's another great one to discuss. Once again, Pliny the Younger specifically tells us about some of the deaths. Why did Pompeii victims turn to stone? Interesting. They didn't. So we'll have to see how she... I have a lot to say about this. Man, this is going to be great. How long did the eruption last? We're going to have a fantastic time. I'm not going to react to the whole thing. I'll skip the last 5 sections to encourage people to go watch the original video. We'll talk about it.
How important was Pompeii? Well, Pompeii was arguably more important to us today than it was to the Roman Empire in its own time. A lot of historians talk about it as being quite an average ancient city.
Was it as important as other cities in the Roman Empire? No, so it becomes kind of a comparative analysis. Not really something... I don't think it was as kind of an invisible city, though. It is mentioned in the sources.
It was one of many that formed the Bay of Naples. There was Herculaneum nearby, there was Stabia, there were lots of other places. It was larger than a lot of those places, and it definitely had a lot of trade.
There we go.
It wasn't hugely significant to the Roman Empire and its functioning as a whole.
Okay, yeah, I mean, when you put it that way, then sure. And as she's saying, it's near Naples, it's near Herculaneum, it's near Sorrento. In fact, it's in between the bay. You have if you've ever been to that area, you've got Sorrento, you've got Stabia. Not only the earthquake damaged Herculaneum, we know that, but when the actual event, the volcanic eruption happened, people died in Herculaneum because of the heat wave, the thermal shock.
Next question. What did Pompeii look like before the eruption? Well, this is a question that's going to be better for a Google image search than it is just for a straight Google search, because if you do that, you'll be able to pull up a number of really good ground plans, maps, and 3D reconstructions.
Not a huge fan of that reconstruction. Let me check it again.
Pull up a number of really good ground plans.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of this, because whoever did it, look, statues are not painted, columns all white, temple, no colors, more statues, not painted. This was not done by someone who understands what polychromatic approach in Roman architecture should be everywhere here to see. I don't think she saw it, by the way. It's not her. So I think this is the editor. I do believe, since she seems to be very competent, I think if she had seen this during editing, she would have said, no, that's not a good representation. It's nice Corinthian columns, but then again, there's no color whatsoever, which really does not give us an idea of what this would have looked like at all. Like old school graphics, now that you make me think about it, it's not even like a reconstruction from a game. They're from the game Kaiser 3, are they?
Maps and 3D reconstructions based on the archaeological evidence, because we're able to see pretty much what Pompeii did look like at the time of the eruption. It was quite built up. There are a number of villas, there are a number of blocks where people lived. There were temples, there were bars, there was an amphitheatre. It was a really well-functioning, built-up city. The one big difference was the volcano itself. It is known today for having these sort of two peaks. Before the eruption, it was much more sort of whole. It looked much more like a mountain with a single peak. So the volcano itself is the biggest difference.
Yes.
Next question. Who lived?
And Posidonius, I actually remembered it. Posidonius tells us a lot about how they tried to interpret it. They were trying to figure out why it happened with the earthquake, because in fact the ancients thought, I'm not going to go too much into the earthquake right now because I want to see if she covers it, but in general, the ancients usually thought that earthquakes wouldn't happen in winter, and it did. In fact, although in this case, when it comes to the volcanic eruption, we know it happened in fall because of the kind of food and fruits that we found. And also the must, I think, was still there from wines inside the Acherrae. Who lived in Pompeii? People from Pompeii?
Lived in Pompeii. Well, Pompeii was home to a huge variety of different people. There were really rich people, there were merchants, there were the poor, there were a lot of slaves, men, women, children. It was very, very diverse. But we know from a lot of recent research looking at the...
I'm not sure that men, women and children makes it diverse. I mean, every town in the world has got men, women and children, so... I know I'm being pedantic, but I'm just trying to figure out. Something that was diverse in Pompeii was the type of crops that they could grow, which is one of the reasons, volcanic terrain tends to be very rich in minerals and it's fertile. Lots of nutrients in it. The ancients do speak about it. They don't know why, and they try to guess. They think it's the ash. It's not the ash, it's what's inside it. But it's regardless, even if they misunderstood, they knew it was rich, and that's one of the reasons why they choose to settle there, regardless of the possible risks. I'll say a few more things about the risks and why ancient populations and humans tend to settle near volcanoes. I do have a reason why they did it specifically, which came up in my research when I made a dedicated episode, but I want to see if she says it because she seems to be really, really competent.
DNA. A lot of people who were living there had ancestral origins in the Eastern Mediterranean. So it seemed like that a lot of people came to settle in Pompeii rather than actually having been born there themselves. A lot of wealthy Romans also had holiday homes in Pompeii. Pompeii was not, however, home to the emperor and his family. The really interesting thing with Pompeii, unlike some other ancient cities, is that we can actually identify some of the residents who were there. So we know that there was a very well-regarded, wealthy woman called Julia Felix, for example, who was behind some of the great building programs.
Just to give you the classical Julia Felix.
The city. We know the names of lots of freedmen or former slaves who had managed to find their own sort of wealth and build amazing houses. So we speak of the House of the Vetii, for example. There are some brothers who were able to use their wealth and sort of establish themselves quite prominently within Pompeii. So inscriptions can actually bring us quite close to a lot of the people who were there.
Look at this. Look at the art and beauty and color. The Mediterranean world is full of this. If you look at it, when they represent their world, they draw in color. These are drawings, and they're representing what they see on a daily basis. They see color, beautiful greens and reds and yellows and blues, blue being a very particular one, if you will.
Why didn't Pompeii evacuate?
Okay, so that's the part where we're getting... But up to this point, I'm giving them a like because I want to be fair. Okay, I'm not an enemy of history here. I know sometimes I'm being harsh because sometimes the experts are horrible. What can I do? I just got to tell it how it is. That's why you guys watch anyways. You're not here for me to pander. But this is good. So let's go. I'm having a great time.
Well, actually, there were some quite good efforts to evacuate Pompeii. Obviously, there wasn't a siren like we have today in situations of disaster. But we know from looking at the remains of humans that we've discovered so far that there are about 1,200 of them. Yeah. And the population of Pompeii was somewhere between 10 and 20,000, which is a huge window. So our best guess would be between 12 and 15,000. And it's true that there are still parts of Pompeii which are still unexcavated. Mm-hmm. So there are likely still human remains down there, and there are some which will have vanished completely. But even given that, it seems unlikely that that number of 1,200 victims will go up excessively. So it would appear that a lot of people did manage to escape from Pompeii. Those who didn't escape, there might have been a huge number of reasons why. They might have been too old to run away. They might have been too young.
This is a cast, by the way, mostly. I'll tell you more about it. I'm waiting for her to say these are not mummies. This is a misconception that a lot of people think. When you look at this, the teeth, some may be original. Sometimes a piece of bone is original. But all the rest that creates the figure is a cast. I'll tell you more about it, but I want to see what she says.
Might have been too infirm. There would also have been people who would have been sort of crushed on the way out and just, their failed escaped attempts. But some people might have decided sort of philosophically that it would have been more sensible to stay put than to run. Because if you think about it, the volcano was raining down a huge amount of pumice and stones and really kind of heavy debris. There was a real danger of being struck on the head, of buildings coming down, of roofs collapsing. If you're running...
That's correct. I don't think there's anything philosophical about it, so I'm not sure why she chose that word specifically. But some people may have decided to stay in place. The ash, however, continued for days. Ash falling incessantly for days. They should have got out of it.
Out in the open, it might seem a lot more dangerous than actually staying put and finding cover. And we find that a lot of the people who were within buildings, people who've been found, they were sort of trying to sort of huddle together, in safe spaces. In the nearby city of Herculaneum, for example, a lot of people were found huddled together within these boat stores. So people typically went to places...
It's very moving if you think about it.
...where they thought that maybe the structure of the building itself might give them some protection from the volcano. So you can see that might have been one way of thinking.
From the volcano, yes, but not from the heat wave, unfortunately. And the ash itself, Pliny the Younger does mention that a lot of people asphyxiated to death. They couldn't breathe.
Other people decided it was safer to run, so people would have been divided just as they would be today. Did Pompeii know Vesuvius was a volcano?
Let's go.
Probably not. The evidence of this is really quite interesting. Pliny the Younger, who was the survivor of the eruption, who wrote these great eyewitness accounts of it, he had an uncle called Pliny the Elder.
Yeah.
And Pliny the Elder, before he died in the eruption, he wrote one of the earliest encyclopedias of natural history in the ancient world. And he had a whole section on volcanoes within this book. And he described volcanoes all over the world. He described Mount Etna in Sicily. He described volcanoes in Persia, in Ethiopia. But there's no Vesuvius in the volcano section of his encyclopedia.
Fantastic, fantastic. She's really, really well. Let me add to that. Sometimes you do think, why would people choose to settle near a volcano? Well, they did know about the type of soil. So would they have known that it was a volcano? Maybe were they just counting active volcanoes? Maybe they did know that this used to be a volcano, but it was a dormant one. It's possible that they didn't know. It's also possible that they did know, but they thought it was dormant and therefore safe. I think what really you could do, apart from reading the sources in this case, is approach it from the perspective of tephrochronology. And for those of you who don't know, tephrochronology is the dating of volcanic eruptions, and they do it through the examination of the layers, which are called tephra, which basically represent all the different materials that are ejected during a volcanic explosion of this type, or in general, a volcanic eruption. So you have ashes, you have lots of different stuff. Everything that is ejected create layers, then they date it, and they try to figure it out. What we know now is that before this explosion, this eruption, the previous one would have been prehistoric. Therefore, this means that there was, at this time, no living memory of any eruption in conjunction with the volcano or Mount Vesuvius. Thus, that's my opinion, either they did not know it was a volcano, like she's anticipating here, or they did know, but they didn't care because they didn't think that this was going to explode. They had no living memory. It never happened. Because again, prehistoric. I think it is fascinating. And then there are other things we can say. I don't know if she's going to talk about the earthquake. I do want to speak a little bit about that. So let's see if she does it.
Where he does describe Vesuvius, he describes it simply as a mountain that's watered by a particular river called the River Sarnus. Another historian describes seeing sort of blackened rocks towards the summit of Vesuvius, but he interprets that as evidence of, he says, fires which had since been quenched. So
there we go. That's why I personally connect to that. I think they knew, but once again, no living memory, no ancestral memory. It just, nothing happened. They thought it was fine. They didn't think it was ever going to happen.
There's really strong evidence here that if people interpreted this as a volcano at all, they thought it had been extinct for a very long time, which actually it had. There was no reason why most people living in Pompeii at that time would have expected this to be anything other than a mountain. It was very, very green, it was verdant, it was covered in crops, seeing people were growing grapevines all the way up it.
Yeah, so basically the benefits outweigh a possible perceived risk, which they did not perceive. That was their point of view, because once again, Pompeii was a very successful trading center. It was at the heart. In fact, we do know that not only they had an inward connection to major routes by land, as she says, it was basically built nearby or in front of the River Sarno. But then there is this lagoon that is described as well, precisely when the Sarno meets the front of the entrance of Pompeii, and there is evidence that they had a fully functioning port. So harbour, lots of boats, trading all over the place, generations and generations of wealth accumulated. Yeah, they didn't think anything was going to happen, and it was a great spot.
People didn't see it as a threat. Were there warnings before the Pompeii
Let's
eruption?
see if the earthquake, maybe.
Yes. We know that in the days immediately leading up to the volcanic eruption, there were a series of earth tremors or small earthquakes which shook Pompeii. And these would have been quite alarming in themselves, because about 17 years earlier, there'd been a really catastrophic earthquake which had caused a lot of damage to buildings within Pompeii.
That's the one mentioned on Naturale Questione, Book 6 by Seneca, and is also the one mentioned by Posidonius. So the earthquake was major, and we are told that not only it killed people, it destroyed buildings. And when I say destroyed buildings, it didn't just destroy buildings in Pompeii, but it destroyed buildings in Herculaneum all the way to Naples. Although when it comes to Naples, we are told that the buildings that were destroyed were only private villas, so not any public property. And when I say public property, I mean the forum or arenas, anything that belongs to the state. Nothing was lost there. A lot of these would have been central. So what that tells me is that most likely Naples' outskirts were hit, and some of the private villas were damaged. 600 sheep are reported to have been dead because of this earthquake. So the earthquake was severe, and it is upon a recovering town that had already been partially damaged by the earthquake that the volcano will erupt in 79 and annihilate the population and completely cover it in ashes. It is very, very, unsettling. The volcanic soil was probably also very attractive to settlers, absolutely, because you can use it to diversify your crops and in fact help support larger population clusters. So it is advantageous, and that's why we still do it. How many towns today, even if we have the full understanding, geological understanding and all that, we still choose to settle nearby these places. So it's one of those situations. Thank you, Petit. I'm glad to hear that.
And Pompeii was still in the process of being rebuilt. There were still things which were being fixed and sort of replenished as a result of that. And what people didn't realise was that earlier earthquake was caused by magma beginning to rise up within the volcano. The volcano was beginning to wake up, but there was no reason why anyone would have put two and two together. And
yes, the causal link. They didn't have the geological, technological, at the end of the day, scientific understanding to connect it. Could they have? How would you really think about it? Put yourself in their shoes. How would you? There was an earthquake. Goodness gracious, I'm glad they survived. And boom, volcanic eruption.
And associated the two disasters. When did Pompeii erupt?
There we go.
This is a more complicated question than it looks. We can say definitively that it erupted in AD 79.
Yes.
But the exact timing of the eruption is still uncertain.
It is uncertain. I think it's between the 24th of October and the 21st of November, but definitely after September, because of the coin of Emperor Titus, which was the 15th, can't think of the word right now, commemoration. It was a commemorative coin for the 15th year of his reign. And that was found. Therefore, if that had been minted already, this has to have happened after September. Did it happen in October or November? It's difficult to say. I think maybe she's going to mention that Pliny actually messes up when it comes to the date. He mentions August, but he was wrong 100% because the coin was already there. Probably a transcription error, in fact.
His eyewitness accounts are 2 letters written by Pliny the Younger to the historian Tacitus, and a number of different manuscripts of these letters have come down to us, and lots of these manuscripts say completely different dates. So scholars who specialise in reading manuscripts have said that the date that looks the most secure within these manuscripts is the 24th of August. So
I disagree. So it's true what she's saying. Like, there are people that say that. I disagree because of the coin. So once you see that that coin was found there and it commemorates the 15th year of Titus, it has to be that coin was minted after September. It cannot be in September. It cannot be August. So I'm not saying she's wrong. There are scholars that think this. So it is maybe you would have to question the coin as a finding. I think it's after September.
24th of August, AD 79 is the traditional date you'll find in a lot of old books about the eruption of Vesuvius. But more recently, archaeological evidence seems to suggest that the eruption took place later in the year. In particular, we can see that there were still leaves on the trees, but things like olives and figs and pomegranates had all been harvested, and that usually took place in September or October, not in August.
It seems like we agree then. At first I thought she was siding with her. No, she was just giving context and I was being a muppet and just not waiting. Let her speak, Metatron.
The wind direction seems to have been sort of accordant with what would happen normally later into autumn. And probably most excitingly, we have a charcoal message that's written on the side of a villa. And that gives us a date. It says on the 17th of October, or the Roman equivalent, he ate rather a lot, or something very sort of mundane like that. And bear in mind...
Sounds like me and pasta.
That charcoal just doesn't really survive for very long. It only takes some rainwater to wash it away. So it couldn't have referred to the previous October. It must refer to October AD 79. So it seems very likely that the volcano erupted after the 17th of October AD 79. Next question.
Splendid, but I wish you mentioned the coin. I'll see if I can find the coin for you in a little bit, but she is very knowledgeable. I really like her. Maybe she's my favorite up to now. Of all the experts that they have showcased on history, put on display, she is literally the best one so far, and can be really annoying when it comes to Pompeii, because it's the history. You know, it's ancient Rome, it's the Mediterranean, it's my people, it's my area of the world. So I can be really like, when it comes to that. So I'm loving her presentation up to this point.
How did the Pompeii eruption happen? We know from the letter of Pliny the Younger that the eruption began with the appearance of a vast cloud emerging from the top of Vesuvius. And
that's the Plinian eruption.
The cloud was almost like a mushroom cloud. It was pine tree shaped in the description of Pliny the Younger. So it sort of billowed outwards. And it got higher and higher and higher, and volcanologists today speak of it exceeding 30 kilometres in height.
Yes.
Once that had happened, the dust contained within this cloud began to rain down quite heavily, and the pumice from it actually formed island-like masses on the water. Pyroclastic
flow. It's described how it was glowing in the dark as they were looking at this from the sea. So it must have been like hell. It must have been like really, really unsettling and impressive event.
So when people were trying to escape on the water, they found that their paths were actually impeded by what was coming from the top of this cloud. Gradually that cloud sort of gave way, and what you had after it collapsed was a series of pyroclastic surges coming out of the volcano. So the whole nature of the eruption changed as it went on. So there was a whole series of events which kind of began with this earthquake 17 years earlier, then a sort of series of smaller earthquakes in the sort of immediate days leading up to it, and then sort of the Big Bang itself. So it was quite a drawn-out process. Next question.
Splendid. Before we move to the next question, I'm having a great time. I don't know about you, but this is good. At the beginning of this, when she spoke a little bit about whether the city of Pompeii was Roman or not, and, I interjected a little bit, I did promise you that I would tell you a little bit about the myth. So you know how we have the myth of the founding of Rome, Romulus, Remus. I think everyone is familiar with that, and you're probably familiar with the idea that, according to the myth, at least the way we are told, is that you have the Trojans led by Aeneas that leave after the destruction of Troy, and then they reach what would be modern day Lazio, so Latium at the time, the geographic area in the center of Italy where Rome is founded, and there they found people, and these people, together with the Trojans, they fuse, create the Latins, and then we have, that's the beginning, at least when it comes to the myth. Now, what's interesting is that even though the idea of any connection with the Trojans is speculative and mythological in nature, we do know that indeed there was a people that lived in that area that probably preceded the Latins. And once the Latins do reach the region, they connect with these people, and then we have the Romans pretty much. The Latin expand. Ancient Romans do mention these originals, and they call them the aborigines, which is where the word aborigines comes from. And it can be translated as the originals or the ancient ones. There are two different terms that are used in Latin, and that's how you translate them. And it's a fascinating story when it comes to the beginning of the people that will become the Romans. When it comes to the founding of Pompeii, however, Strabo kind of speaks a little bit about it, but one of the things that we're told when it comes to the myth is that the city would have allegedly been founded by Hercules, the demigod himself. And I always thought that was fascinating because, Rome is the capital and it was founded by Romulus. Okay, great, maybe Latinus, King Latinus, but Aeneas is cool, but Hercules is Hercules. So you know what I mean? So I love it how the Romans and the ancients always, and the Greeks did that too, liked to connect cities with heroes, demigods, and gods, because even the word for Lazio, Latium, the region where Rome is built, it comes either from a word from Archaic Latin, which means the expanse, because of the valleys, or mythologically, it could mean the hidden place, hiding from Jupiter. That would be the mythological explanation. And then there is another explanation which says maybe it's just because that is one of the possible connections in Archaic Latin would be with the word swamp or marshes. So it could be that they were considered the inhabitants of the marshes and the valleys, as opposed to the people of the hills, which were different Italic populations anyways. Fascinating stuff. But even in mythology, there is oftentimes a connection to reality. And I would say that mythology can be considered an interpretation of reality with the means that people had at the time.
Was there lava in Pompeii? No, and this is actually quite surprising for a lot of people. There wasn't actually lava in this particular type of eruption. It was a different kind of eruption which was dominated by stones, by dust, we call it a nuée ardente, these particular types of cloud which come down the mountainside. They're sort of balls of gas and rock, but absolutely no lava.
Really, because she did mention the magma earlier, so absolutely no lava, maybe less lava would be my approach. Again, she's the expert, so do take what I say when it comes to this. I'm just speculating. What I said before, based on sources. This, personal speculation, so do take her position as she's the expert before mine. But maybe some lava, because at the end of the day, lava is the same as magma. The difference is that magma is when it's still inside, and lava is when it's outside. But it's still the same. Fused flowing rock, so absolutely no lava, and yet the sources tell us that there was luminescence at night, which to me sounds like lava. I don't know why she's so categorical about it. I'm gonna have to ask Dr. Canestrelli because he's more specialized than me when it comes to classical. He's one of my he's my lead researcher, in fact. I'll have to ask him about that.
Next question: was there a tsunami in Pompeii?
Maybe she means that the lava didn't reach the town. Maybe the first buildings on the slopes, though?
And possibly comes from the film Pompeii, which features a very, very dramatic tsunami. It might also derive from the fact that our eyewitness, Pliny the Younger, describes the sea as being sucked back in upon the seabed, and there being sort of a load of sort of fish being left behind. But it's very unlikely that what he was describing was actually a tsunami.
I don't think that's a tsunami, it really depends. Like even Japan, which is a high tsunami risk area, not all of Japan is. It depends on what sea, and it depends where you face. Of course, now everyone knows about the, what is it called? Gosh, I can't remember. I'm getting confused with Fukushima. We all know about Fukushima. I was living in Japan, by the way, when the Fukushima disaster happened. It's just that I was living so far away down south that it didn't matter. We didn't get, but we did go into a tsunami alert for some time, and I had already, because I was living there, I was working there, and what I would do is that I had memorized the route to the nearest shelter in the case of a possible tsunami, because I was living on a small fisherman village that was literally on the sea, but it was on the sea that in a section of Japan which was a low risk of tsunami. It was still a risk of tsunami, but it was low risk. It wasn't high risk like that area, which is why they built those walls, although they thought that it would have been enough to block any tsunami, but the tsunami that actually did arrive, it was so high with the waves that it literally went above, and the Japanese engineers didn't think that could have happened. Maybe people will talk about this in a couple of thousand years with scientific understanding that could be like, yeah, of course this would have happened, but people didn't know. So yeah, no, it really depends on the area. But I had memorized how to get there, and every time I would go to sleep, I would have my backpack full with food and my passport, documents. Yeah, because that happened exactly while I was there. Have you been through any earthquakes? Major earthquakes, no. In Japan, I only experienced a little bit of seismic, but yes, a little bit. Once I did wake up because things were moving a little bit, but nothing major, and definitely something that the Japanese, which are quite used to, they didn't even consider it. Like, oh yeah, I didn't even wake up type of thing. For me, it was a little bit like, oh, what's happening? But yeah.
Probably this was an effect of the earthquakes, which were really sort of causing a lot of chaos in the region of the Bay of Naples. There's no great evidence archaeologically for a tsunami. There's no sort of evidence of rising water, of sort of watermarks, of marine life being sort of stranded in areas where you wouldn't expect it to be found. So I would say very, very unlikely that there was a tsunami in Pompeii during the eruption.
Just for fun, the word tsunami in Japanese, nami is the word they use for wave, and incidentally, if you've ever played Street Fighter, you know when Ryu and Ken, when they say Hadouken, right? The ha in Hadouken is the same character that you use to read on its own nami, which means wave. So do then means moving. It's the character that on its own would be read ugoku, and it means to move. And then ken can be translated, depending on how you write it, as sword, but not in this case. The way it's written, it's more of a fist. So it's the fist, or maybe the attack of the moving wave. That's what Hadouken means. And it's the same word, the same character you use in tsunami on the second part. And tsu is just a harbor or a port. So it is translated as tidal wave in English, but if you were to translate it literally, it actually means port wave or harbor wave. That would be the translation. So Hadouken.
Eruption. Another question. Did the Pompeii victims suffer? This is actually a horrible question to answer because in
I thought for a moment that she was like, this is a horrible question to ask. Shame on you.
In many cases, the answer is yes, people did suffer during the eruption. This is because the nature of the eruption was such, it really depended on when you were struck and exactly where you were at that moment in time. There were a variety of different deaths. So looking at some of the victims of Vesuvius, you'll see that they have very sort of clenched fists like this. You call it kind of a boxer pose. And that is evidence that those people suffered from thermal shock. It's when the body reacts to extreme heat, the tendons contract very, very rapidly. So those people would have succumbed to this very, very horrible fate. There are other people who were caught up in sort of the extreme heat of a pyroclastic surge. This could be 400 degrees Celsius. And in that kind of situation, the human brain essentially boils.
I was going to say be instantaneous, I think.
There were people who would have been vaporized, probably before they actually knew exactly what was happening to them.
I wonder if it's faster than nervous connection, like synapses. Is it faster than how quickly pain receptors speak to the brain? Maybe. I know it was the case when it's like in severe, like if you're really underwater in crazy pressures, then if something happens and the pressure manages to enter the vessel, it's instantaneous. You can't even process it quick enough to suffer for it. Here, I wonder.
There are other people who suffered from something like a death by asphyxiation.
Asphyxiation, it's mentioned by Pliny the Younger, yeah.
The Elder.
Oh, the Elder, was it?
It's our most famous victim of the eruption.
Oh, victim, exactly. No, but it's Pliny the Younger that tells us about it.
He suffered from something like asthma as an adult, and it's said that his lungs were gradually sort of filling up with the ash. And he was unable to breathe properly. So there are people who would have suffered sort of maybe heart attacks, sort of breathing difficulties, and sort of succumbed to deaths like that. Other people would have been crushed to death. There would have been a lot of buildings falling down on them. There's a huge range of different deaths and different scenarios that people suffered from during the eruption. So it's very, very difficult to generalise, but yes, people did, sadly, very tragically suffer during the...
I really like how she explains things. Like, she goes into the very detailed technical terminology, but she explains it to you. She's she's an excellent speaker, and that's not always the case. I mean, sometimes you got like these academics, they know, but they don't know how to tell you. And I've had a couple of those as my teachers at university. Luckily, I want to say most of my university professors were actually very competent, excellent teachers as well, but they're two completely separate skills. Just because you're skilled and understand something, it doesn't mean that you know how to convey and pass along that knowledge. They're two completely unrelated skills, in fact, I want to say. And it's really annoying when you've got someone who just starts speaking, I'm like, I have no idea what you're saying. Like, I really don't understand. You're skipping too much, unless you're speaking to a specialized group. So like if you're doing a conference for people that are professionals, obviously you don't have to be there and explain every single term because they already know. But when you speak to the public, like in this case, she's speaking to the public, you have to be able to mitigate how. You can still use the technical terminology, but you need to explain it. And she's doing a fantastic job at doing that. So I appreciate that as a teacher myself. All right, let's talk about the victims. I'm going to watch. This is going to be a section where I'm going to have a few things to say. I imagine she's going to mention Giuseppe Fiorelli, monumental archaeologist when it comes to the very, very important. Let's see if she pronounces it right. It's an Italian one.
Eruption. Another question. Mm-hmm. Possibly my favourite question.
Okay.
Why did Pompeii victims turn to stone? People didn't actually turn to stone in the eruption of Vesuvius. What this question refers to is the fact that we actually have casts created, so people who look like they're made of stone from Pompeii. In the Victorian period, it was discovered that actually the people who had been covered over very, very well by the dust and the debris of the volcano had left an imprint of their body within that debris. Yeah. And after their bodies decomposed, this is what was left behind. So very, very cleverly, archaeologists went in and discovered that they could actually... Giuseppe Fiorelli is the guy. Pour plaster of Paris into liquid. These sort of mould-like shapes to create a 3D recreation of these victims in their final moments. And a lot of these casts are tremendous. They really capture the detail. They show what people were wearing. They show that... Absolutely. 1863, by the way, just to give you the exact date. So what Giuseppe Fiorelli did, exactly how she said, she used this fusion of liquid plaster to create these casts. And then because you have to imagine, yes, the ash covered these bodies. And so you have this inside, right, with the body and then the ash all around it. But with 2,000 years almost, clearly the bodies decay and decompose. But the vacuum inside is in the exact shape because now the ash has solidified and it's basically a perfect representation of what was there, but as a negative, if you will. And so what they did is that they inserted this liquid plaster, recreated a statue that is exactly how the body looked in the moment of death, and then
or maybe a few moments before death, in fact, some of these. And then they just removed the ash very carefully and it left the casts. Now, some of the contents of this cast do have a nail, a couple of teeth, some bone, cranial cavity a little bit. That's how they did it, but it's important to underline that because it's not the people turned into stone, these are not mummies, but they are exactly in the original position as they were almost 2,000 years ago during this catastrophic event.
Their jewellery, quite often they show their final positions. So what we see are actually casts of people. They're not actually people who've become stone themselves. Next question.
One more.
How long did the Pompeii eruption last? We're told that the first signs of the eruption were seen around lunchtime. So the appearance of a great cloud was spotted by Pliny the Elder's sister, called Plinia. And this was on a faraway bay, so this is about 30 kilometres away in a place called Misenum, so not right underneath the volcano. Possibly it would have been visible even earlier than that, probably likely to have been visible earlier than that in Pompeii, in the places that were closer.
Right.
So it's starting kind of late morning, lunchtime sort of time. It carried on throughout the afternoon with the pumice fall, all through the night as well, into the next morning, and I would say almost certainly into the afternoon as well. So we're talking somewhere in the region of 18 to 24 hours for the duration of the main eruption. There would clearly have been sort of aftershocks from that, like you would have from an earthquake as well, but sort of the main event is in that sort of 18 to 24 hour period.
And to connect, of course, to what I was saying, main event, she's spot on. But when it comes to the continuation of the rain of ash, that would have continued for days, uninterrupted, constantly. It must have been. This is one last thing I want to say about this, and then we leave these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 more sections for you to enjoy over at the original channel, as I always do. That's how I make my React content. I don't want to react to the whole thing, but I do want to add something. How would they try to explain this? This is a question that we can ask, and sometimes we might think, I am sure that some people would have thought this was supernatural. Like some people would have thought it was like the ire of the gods, for instance. Some people might have thought it was some kind of heavenly punishment. Maybe not exactly during the event, because during the event you don't have really that much time to think. Maybe you might think, oh my gosh, are the gods destroying us, and then try to run away? But the sources don't mention that. For what I could see, the authors that do talk about this try to find a natural explanation, and I thought that was absolutely fascinating. Very, very. I was actually expecting, when we were reviewing the data with Dr. Canestrelli and a couple of other, Dr. Garigliano, we were reviewing a little bit the data together, and I was expecting to see more religious connotation from the sources, but the reality is that I didn't find any. Now, would the population have thought that? Yeah, I would think so. I mean, even today, it would depend person by person, but the people that write, they don't mention it. They just try to find a natural cause. In fact, they're very fatalistic. There we go. Fatalistic, maybe, in nature, in the way they were interpreting it. Anyways, this is when it comes to this beautiful. I'm really happy that this turned out to be a fantastic video from History Hit. And this historian, what's her name? Historian and author Daisy Dunn. I'm absolutely going to check out her books because, I mean, she's really, really good. And I'm very happy about that because I can't always say that about the videos that I watch. As I say, hit or miss. This was absolutely a hit. So I'm very, very, very happy about that.